Hi,
Hi,
everybody.
Mom.
Welcome. And we're here for a special episode of Fellowship of the Golden Age. With me today, I have Arie. So, hi, Arie.
Hello.
Um, so, what we're going to do is during the last conference, the US conference, I was really interested to hear the stories about Summit Lighthouse and the shelters episode and things like that. So I sort of thought, and I've been thinking for a while, it'd be really cool to sort of do an interview about this. So Ari is somebody who's transitioned between the two dispensations, and I and he's kindly agreed to come along and join me. So Ari, could you give a little bit of background in your journey with the masters and how you came to the Summit Lighthouse and so on, and just a bit of your history, your spiritual seeking history?
Well, I think I'd like to start. I was on a business trip and I ended up in Chicago when I was finished. So I live in Montreal, Canada. So I should have been coming back to my home, but I had this sense that maybe I shouldn't go that way. I should go the other way. And I had a station wagon, and so instead of heading back towards Montreal, I headed towards California. And I had no idea what I was really going there for, except that I had an inner sense that there was something there for me. And so I'm driving along. It wasn't too long before this hitchhiker is there. And it wasn't going that very far, but he asked me some very uh, peculiar questions. And uh, and it was only after I saw a picture of Lord Maitreya that I said, "Oh my goodness, that was him." Now, uh, my take on that was at the time wasn't like anything out of the ordinary, but it seemed to me that I was going in the right direction, even though I didn't really know where I was going. And I ended up in San Francisco, and I parked my car near the bay, and every day I'd go out looking for whatever it was I was supposedly looking for, and I was mostly going to like esoteric type of books, bookstores, or meetings and stuff. And I did this for about 6 months, and then suddenly one day I saw a poster of Saint Germain, and it was Elizabeth Clare Prophet. It was a conference called Become the Buddha in San Francisco. So anything I saw that didn't know too much about, didn't want I wanted to check out. So this is okay. I'm going to go check this out. Now I'm a professional astrologer. And I was very much into all kinds of esoteric teachings. I already spent time in India, wandering around the Himalayas myself. So uh, if this sounds a little odd to anybody listening to it, it wasn't odd for me. so so then I go to this conference, and there's this woman, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, and she was talking about basically Buddhist type teachings, which is something I had fairly recently been totally immersed in myself. So I was just sitting there, go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then there were these dictations from representatives of the 5D anti-Buddhas, and this is good stuff in my mind. And I should say that on my way to that particular conference, I took a tram and a bus, and it was supposed to take me something like an hour and 20 minutes to get there, or whatever it was. And then I got on this bus, and then the bus driver says to everybody, "Everybody's got to get out. I have to go back to the station or something. But if you're going that way, you can stay on." And And where he was going was right by the convention center where the conference was at. So I said to myself, "Oh, this is going to be good." So that's my introduction to this whole meeting. And so during this conference, having discovered the teachings of the ascended masters, they were going to have a conference down in Pasadena in the LA area in 2 weeks. So I didn't have really any money. So I got a job as Santa Claus, made enough money to go down to get to this conference. And so, my second conference, actually. The first one wasn't called fully a conference. Anyway, during the this conference, one of the masters said, "Before you take on the world, you should go to Summit University." Now, I didn't know if I was going to take on the world, but it just sort of said to myself, "Well, this sounds like a good thing to go and do." So I registered for Summit University, even though I had no money.
Hey, I'm just
And
curious, what roughly what year was this, would this have been, do you
this
think?
is 1977,
Okay, wow, yeah.
December 1977. So I had no money, but I wanted to go, and I figured I'm here, I'm going to go. So I registered, and they asked me about paying, and I said, "Oh, it's going to come." I had a couple of days, and then a couple of days later, the money came, and off I went. 3 months of Summit University, and of course, at the time, I didn't really know how much about alchemy, but I kind of had the principles half down by what way I did it in my way, and so that was my introduction to these ascended masters, and then for 3 months, uh, I got to basically I felt like I was living in paradise because I had been trekking all over the world, living in you know. Just basically getting by, but looking for any pearl I could find anywhere. And here I had all the food there, a bed to sleep on. During that 6 months in San Francisco, I was just sleeping in the back of my car, and and then having all these phenomenal teachings all day long. And then Elizabeth Clare Prophet would show up here and there and give her teachings and stuff. And it wasn't too long while I was there that I was amazed when I found fellow attendees at the conference complaining about how hard it was, how difficult it was, and a completely different experience for me. Um, I don't know how many were like that, but there was bumping into people like that, like got to get up at 6 in the morning and I don't know, sit in a seat listening. I guess for some people it was really hard, but for me it was like just wonderful.
Mm.
And kind of like just throwing that out there, kind of like maybe helps explain the bomb shelter experience, which was just for me an adventure. Now the whole organization had moved to Montana, and we started getting these dictations that were stressing the importance of being prepared for any eventuality. And and so I, at this point in the 80s, had gone back to Montreal, and I had my own family, and I was part of the Montreal Teaching Center. And there was a group that came from Montana to sell the idea of the bomb shelter, buying place in their bomb shelter if you wanted to, and they were going around to the different centers and groups with that. And then I think it was maybe October of 1989, Saint Germain gave a dictation, and he was talking about, that we get insurance policies for house and car and fire. Well, this was important to go and be in a bomb shelter as an life insurance policy. And he was talking about how America was defenseless, that the Soviet Union, the leaders there saw that things were coming to an end, and they had their best. They had few options, but their best option was to attack the United States with nuclear missiles and basically, go to war. And it was interesting because Saint Germain gave Ronald Reagan the whole plan to defend America, what was then called Star Wars, which was the Strategic Defense Initiative, which basically would put into place a whole space shield over America that would make any nuclear attack obsolete. And Reagan, like most presidents, didn't go ahead with it. He talked a good game, but he didn't go ahead with it, and so masters were very disappointed in him. Even though modern day Republicans think he was a great president, don't ask Saint Germain if he was a great president. His whole playing along with the Soviets and the whole detente and all of that he did, he made or put America in an incredibly vulnerable situation. So according to Saint Germain, it was very, very important for us to do this, and it was something that many people responded to. And when I got to Montana with my family, there were people
I'm
from
just curious, Arie, like how
all over the world.
much would you say, Saint Germain was pushing you guys to do this, and how much do you think it was actually an interpretation to the messages he gave? Was there, a layer of interpretation which reacted to this?
There was no layer of interpretation because it was something that was coming to us many over other dictations, and it was. Uh, uh, I mean, in the early 80s, Elizabeth Perry Prophet put out a book on prophecies for the 80s. Mm-hmm. And so there was this potentiality of some really heavy duty things happening. And when it became very clear from the dictations that, that this was an imminent threat, now, clearly it wasn't going to be 100% this is going to happen, but it sounded like it was a very strong possibility. And so it was, you might say, and back then the masters would be very powerful in their dictations, and it was basically, you got to do this. To me, there was nothing to think about. This was clearly what very, very important to do, not just to save so-called the community, but for the whole world. And in terms of what it did, according to the master, it created a deterrence. And it also allowed God to intercede when he saw that people were willing to do all of this. It was almost like then this could have been avoided. Now the funny thing about it all, of course, is it never happened. So what does that all mean? And that's really where the interpretation can come into place, because when so-called nothing happened, there were some people, perhaps too many, that weren't happy. How could you be, in my mind, not happy when the world wasn't destroyed? So it was like the sense of, for some people, it was a tremendous sacrifice, of your time, your money, your energy. But Saint Germain said, he asked us, forgive us 7 months of our lives. off and go sailing around the world. So you know, if you look at it like that, go back to your lives and then pick up the pieces where they were, and that's all, you know. But this is the need of the hour. I mean, we had all of these prophecies from Nostradamus, from Mother Mary, uh, and so this was just, you might say, part of the times of the end of the age of Pisces, that there was, you know, these potential scenarios that could manifest. And so for someone like me, the going and having a bomb shelter and living in Montana, it was, hey, a beautiful place to live. I was there for a year and a half, you know, had a bomb shelter spot uh, for my family, and there we were, you know. So it uh, you know, I just look at it as an initiation, an experience, you know, just like an adventure.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people that I interacted with seemed to be very okay with everything. You know, it was just something that we were a part of. And then life goes on, you know. So a lot of us went back to our homes afterwards, and yeah, just picked up the pieces and went back to work and back to doing whatever it was we were doing. And certainly the people in Montreal that participated in that, I didn't notice anything negative from any of them about it all. But one thing I can say, because I know that Kim taught that Elizabeth Clare Prophet didn't really do much to process what had happened when it was over and help people get through it. But right when it was over, this very difficult period, and of course the Soviet Union came apart, Elizabeth Clare Prophet started a course on Napoleon Hill's law of success, which is really the abundance and how to make, might say, money in this world. And Napoleon Hill, from earlier in the 20th century, had been sponsored by the Ascended Masters. He wrote the book Grow Rich. What was it? Think and Grow Rich. And his main course was called The Law of Success. And it was just a fantastic course. It had 17 lessons, so it took, I guess, 17 weeks. And so the whole community was given this course, and I guess that was Elizabeth Clare Prophet's attempt to help people get back on their feet, deal with the next step in life, whatever was going to happen or whatever they were going to go through. And and it was soon after that that I returned back to Montreal. But in terms of this whole bomb shelter experience, and that this organization had turned into a survivalist cult, well, you know, from my experience, it was like you know, this world was in a serious problem. The Soviet Union controlled half the world at the time. Eastern Europe was totally controlled by the Soviet Union. It was so impoverished, and uh, let alone all these other countries that they ran and controlled. And so it was definitely were interesting times in that sense. I mean, earlier in my life, I remember with the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know, being in primary school, and we were taught what to do in case of bombs, and you know, that whole thing. It was more a scenario of the times. This so-called Cold War that fortunately never got hot, and and of course we did our every Saint Germain service, which is our Saturday night service. We would spend hours each service decreeing on you know, on stopping the spread of world communism, and on the capitalist communist conspiracy that Saint Germain talked about, and uh, and so doing these decree sessions every Saturday night for 4 hours for a decade or longer. And then all of a sudden, one day, the Soviet Union collapsed. So anybody asks me why or how the Soviet Union collapsed, I'll say my answer is very simple. I did it. And I and every other keeper of the flame and person that was invoking these decrees and giving these judgment calls and all of the reverse the tides and the energies that we invoked, well, this allowed the ascended masters to do what they did. And so the way I look at it is that the bomb shelter cycle was absolutely vital and necessary because it uh, it basically created the necessary steps for God and the ascended masters then to change the direction of history. One with God is a majority, and if there are enough people uh, doing what we were doing, and that was enough. I mean, it's very clear that from the perspective of the ascended masters, they have all the power in the universe. We down here don't have any of that power, but we have all the authority for this planet.
Mm-hmm.
So by coming together and using their power and with our authority, they could then do enough to mitigate the entire situation to the point where they were able to literally dissolve the situation. Obviously, there were other factors involved too, but from my perspective, it was the number one factor that happened, and so I believe that the power of decrees is incredible.
Yeah, I do too, because like I didn't come across the any ascended master teachings until about 2016, so not that long ago. And I remember at this point, it was a really key turning point for me around it's about 2008, 2009, and I just went through these major shifts, and a lot of, a huge amount of fear was coming up, fear that the world was going to end, and fear of cataclysm. And I just remember sort of moving through everything, like, I made a lot of forward progress in my own life, but just there came this point, maybe it was like maybe about 2013, and I just felt into it and I thought, there's something that has helped me and the world to move forward, but I didn't know what it was. And I honestly look back, and now with the knowledge that there were people decreeing and bringing through this energy from the masters, like letting that anchor into the planet, I'm quite sure that that's what was helping to carry the world along. Not solely, of course, but yeah, it was just an anchor point for the light to come in to help a lot of things shift. Because I really felt it without any knowledge of a conscious knowledge of ascended masters. It was quite a distinct.
After the bomb shelter cycle, wasn't too long before some major changes started to happen. And that was the re-engineering of the entire church or an organization, where Elizabeth Clare Prophet started to basically hand over the reins to Gilbert Clairvaux, who was first uh, sort of came on board as an advisor and then became president because of his, seeing what needed to be done to the entire organization. So it was a real paradigm shift. And Kim, I had a talk with Kim at the last conference, and he thought it was sort of the beginning of the end of the organization. For me, as I went back to Montreal, to me, it was the exact opposite. To me, instead of it going downhill, to me, it was going on an upward trajectory. And so I had a completely different experience or perspective on what was going on. Because in Montreal, we were going through what was called community building. So every month, we had someone coming from Montana to part of this whole new restructuring of the organization. Had a lot to do with empowering groups, empowering individuals. Before that, Elizabeth Clare Prophet controlled everything. So now she was letting that all go and letting people in groups come into their own, you might say. And so for me, it was a very exciting time because it had been a very, very controlled group, very hierarchical setup. And you basically had to follow the line. And so then after a couple of years of all of this, Gilbert Clairvaux was out. And so it was there was a coup by certain old time ministers and people in the organization that clearly didn't like or didn't want this paradigm shift from happening. And as soon as Elizabeth Clare Prophet was no longer able to run the show and was getting very ill, they made their move and just took over. And which was a bit of a shock to everybody else, us out in the not there at headquarters. Now, Kim, I know, was there in Montana, so he saw, I guess, a lot of what was going on there, but we were oblivious to any difficulties that were happening. And so it was, so what could have been a shift of the organization so that it could be an Aquarian Age organization, not just the end of Pisces organization. Well, that unfortunately didn't happen. And then there was a conference in Montana I went to after Kim had just gotten started. He was living in New York at the time, the state of New York. And I went to a conference and I was writing a lot of letters to the field telling people about what was going on and try to stop it and try to get things back on track. At the time, I was president of the Church of Canada, Church Universal and Triumphant of Canada, as well as the Montreal Teaching Center. So I was very active and very involved in many aspects of the organization. And as I started to get to know more and more of what was going on, I was trying to see what I could do to stop it from happening. And we had even made a proposal as the Church of Canada for tithe sharing, because back then, all the tithes we would raise or get, we would send back to headquarters. Now, most churches would then send back a certain percentage of that back to the local group, whether it be 50%, 80%, 25%. I mean, different groups, organizations have different things, but to us, they sent nothing. And so we came out with a plan of how we could grow the Church of Canada by sharing the tithing, and that we saw that in 2 years, the church at headquarters would be getting even more money than they were presently getting. But this would grow the church, you know. It was turned down because I was told that it would empower us too much. So the very thing that we were trying to do or could do, it was just all cut off. So it was like, people at the headquarters wanted to control every aspect of it. And so what quickly happened at the time was people who were moving into higher levels of Christhood were basically, they were cut off, like their necks were chopped off. And so there were a bunch of us that were either excommunicated or just quit on our own because of what we saw happening. That last conference, the reason I brought it up, that I went to try to see if I could do anything to stop this. After that conference, I went to see Kim, and we were talking about it, and I was telling him what I had done and gone through and what I had experienced. And he said to me, "Well, why don't you ask Jesus a question about this?" So I thought to myself, that's a good idea. I didn't know I could do that just like that. So I did. And Jesus said, "It's over."
Yeah.
And it was a bit shocking, after spending years and years so involved in an organization. But he was very direct and very blunt, and it was like the sponsorship of the Ascended Masters was no longer there,
Yep.
and the whole thing was over. So it was, yeah, it was a real surprise, and so that was it. Uh, uh, so that left my involvement with CU2O completely over. Then I got involved with the Spiritual Awareness Fellowship with Carl Showalter was leading at the time. He still is. And I helped him organize it to get it organized as more of a worldwide organization instead of just a Chicago organization. And we had some meetings in Chicago about that, and it took off. The group there voted, agreed with with what I was suggesting that happen. And but then, of course, I got more and more involved with the Kim Michaels, but he doesn't have an organization. It's just teachings.
Mm.
And so I was getting the books into the local bookstores. I used to do that with the Summit Lighthouse as well. And of course, now you don't need to do any of that with Amazon. It's so
Yeah.
easy for anybody to get the books and stuff. But back then, it was much more difficult to get access to any of these materials. So, in terms of the transition from one organization to another, I mean, the Ascended Masters are the Ascended Masters, so their teachings continue. Progressive revelation continues. So it's just like just the spokesperson is different. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
from my perspective, it's kind of interesting to hear, how you've talked about, the communications from the masters back in Summit Lighthouse compared to what we receive through this dispensation. And like, I'll be honest with you, I find it like hard to imagine that the masters would say, you should do this or you should do that. Like, it sort of seems, because they're total respecters of free will, like, and it just seems totally different to what is received through this dispensation. But again, progressive revelation, like,
well, they never said you have to do this. They said it's uh, this is what's needed to be done. Whoever wants to do it, great. That's all. They don't see. You think you should be there? Great. If you don't, that's great too. I mean, that's but they're what they were, but they were clearly imploring us to take this situation extremely seriousness. And but Saint Germain did say if you have a family and you don't protect them, make sure they're secure, you're going to have the karma of that on your head. So that's something for you to think about. So if you you can look at it different ways. But it was made to me very clear how important it was to do it. And it's, like, um, it's like back then they were very much more, you might say, potent in telling the student body that there were things on the path that one should definitely be doing that you don't hear about anymore.
mm,
But you also have to consider that the world was in crisis back then. So if
yeah,
you believe that this nuclear disaster could have happened, that changes your take on everything. If you just think that was not a real possibility, well, then that's your take. But I mean, Mother Mary at Fatima had some pretty heavy prophecies. Even George Washington had some pretty heavy takes on what could happen, let alone Nostradamus, which was really a big thing back then, because that was the
Mm.
the 1990s was coming, and his level of accuracy and his predictions was very, very high. There were many
Mm.
other predictions, going on. Some of them were kind of wild, but the main thing is that the ascended masters were giving us direct indications of what was going on. I mean, if you were living if you were around from 1980 on, it was like, the giving Ronald Reagan as president of the United States a whole plan to defend America through this strategic defense initiative. I mean, that was a big thing. I mean, he talked about it in his State of the Union messages. It was a big initiative that he was moving ahead on. But then he somehow got convinced to enter into these détente agreements with the Soviet Union, and it was clear that the power elite and the fallen ones were pushing him to go in that direction.
Mm.
And of course, the newspapers of the day, or the media, were very happy to see him try to negotiate peace with the Soviet Union. But from what the masters were telling us, they were just playing uh, America. They weren't serious about peace. That wasn't what they wanted. I mean, they're an evil empire. They always were. That's what they were. And when you're
Mm.
talking to a beast like that, all it wants is more. It wants to just continuously grow and eat up more of whatever they can get their jaws on. And that's what they were doing back ever since World War II ended. Just uh, picking up one country after another, and it was just spreading and spreading and spreading. So people today, it's a different world. Now,
Mm.
I should add that at the end of the age of Pisces, I mean, there was just so much heavy karma, density, darkness that was there from that whole 2,000 year period, and it was just sitting on the world. And so, if you think it's a dark and dense world now, man, you should have lived back then. It was like,
Well, I was alive then, and I did live through it all. Because as you're talking about it, I'm just remembering, like, yeah, it was actually kind of scary at times, like just feeling into what was going on in the world.
but for a lot of us, the whole bomb shelter experience, there was nothing scary about it at all. You're doing what you feel that the ascended masters are asking you to do. So what's there to worry about? You look out for them, they'll look out for you. I mean, that was basically the orientation. Uh, as far as what's going to happen to the world, I mean, it's kind of like um, it's not the sense that I'm going to survive and the world's going to be destroyed. So what's the point of doing this? It's a sense by my doing this, maybe the world won't be destroyed. I mean, you don't think about all of these negative portents because you'd only think about them if you're not doing anything about it. But if you're doing what you think you can do to prevent it from happening, well, then you're going to feel good about yourself because you're doing
Yeah,
something,
that's
and
interesting. Yeah, yeah.
you're doing it in alignment with the spiritual hierarchy that oversee this planet. So if they're in charge of this planet and they have to deal with all of the components, which include, what all of these different evolutions and these fallen ones want to do, I mean, there's only so much obviously they can do. But when they give you hints or direction by doing certain things, then maybe some really good things can happen because of it. And that's what turned out. So it's like, uh, so if I look back on what about the Summit Lighthouse, I mean, I look at it as a great accomplishment and a great victory. Mother Mary actually said after the bomb shelter, I mentioned it the last conference that she said, "You have won a great victory." So, so people that came out of that bomb shelter cycle and, you know, having all of these debts and, difficulties from, doing what they did. I mean, it's like uh, sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good. That's all. And, that nothing actually happened was great.
Yeah.
So how that's it. Uh, uh, anyway, the Summit Lighthouse, as an organization, did you have all of these teachings, uh, and they keep on print publishing more and more teachings. So they got a lot of still good things happening from that organization, but of course they've been cut off from the ascended masters. Um, because they cut themselves off. You see, there were a number of dictations talking about that that this organization wouldn't last very long into the Aquarian age if they didn't make changes, and and those changes that were starting to happen were thwarted and stopped. So it's kind of like it just the way things work sometimes. But there was people decreeing day and night. The work that was done was incredible. In if you're just in the Kim Michaels group, there's very little asked from anybody. You know, we
Mm.
we used to have so many services, decree sessions. Uh, we'd have prayer vigils. We'd have all kinds of things all going on. And now there's next to nothing. One Sunday, at the end of the month, we're asked to do a 4-hour Mother Mary prayer vigil. Gosh, we used to do that almost every day back then. So it's like it's like everything's changed. Which just tells me that the crisis is over. Now we're beginning a new age, and it's like a white page. Anything can happen. Everybody's free now. Do whatever you want. Take as much or as little as you want. But back then, it was the whole planet was in a very dangerous situation, and uh, I mean, there were times where the economy was in danger of complete collapse as well. I mean, it was, uh, I mean, potentially could still happen with the economy, but the threats are different today than they were back then. And it's
Mm.
just we're living in a different time, a different era, and it's uh, so we can move into Aquarian age. Might take a few hundred years. A golden age might take a few hundred years. Maybe it'll take 50 years. It's all up to us. But
Yeah, I
what?
feel like now we're sort of establishing the groundwork for the golden age, as in, there's not this desperate need to do so much invoking of decrees and of light and everything. We've given that freedom, but it's now time for us to start developing ourselves in how we express our Christhood. So that means working, the work now is very much a full-on commitment to resolving
And
psychology. Like,
one thing I learned from the ascended masters is that everybody has to be given the chance, the opportunity to show what they're about. So these fallen ones and everybody else, we're all given the initiation, but you have to have the time, the opportunity. So uh, every year, there more and more of these fallen ones in particular are taken away. Either they go to their second death or they found another planet to live on or whatever is done with them. So this planet becomes lighter and lighter, and they don't re-embody back on this planet. So we're moving in a very positive direction, for that. But there's still many of them out there, and all kinds of people doing their crazy stuff. But they have to be allowed to play their roles and do their thing, and it's just the way it is. It's just the way it works, And so it's there's a timetable, and you got to have patience to have to go live on a planet that's like so dark and dense and has so many awful things happening on it. But it's it really comes down to us, and how much we can make things, let's say, move more quickly into this golden age. So as more and more of us respond in whatever way we can, and and especially if more and more of us can be the open door for the masters and our I am presence to work through us, then it just can only get better and better on this planet.
Yeah, absolutely. As we're raising our own consciousness, we become clearer to be that open door. And also, yeah, it just raises the collective bar. And that means these fallen ones, they can't, I don't know, the density won't hold them here because the density is lightening. It's becoming just too light for them to embody here. So it's
And
sort
we're
of
very
the whole.
fortunate. And we're very fortunate. We have someone like Kim that can be so neutral, and he can be
Mm,
a clear pane of glass, an open door for the Ascended Masters to continue to release their teachings through him. They're
mm,
you know they're 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 fresh, they're new, they're like uh, they're built, you might say, on what came before, but it's it's very, very different, in the sense that the
mm,
emphasis is in a completely different direction. And but one thing would like to add here is that back when I was in the Summit Lighthouse, or Church Universal and Triumphant, it was really mother and her children, and then the mother and children going through the 14 stations of the cross, going through these initiations. So it was a very different type of approach. So it was a very, although it was a very controlling kind of uh, organization, it really couldn't be anything else because of the people that were in the organization. They were old, unbalanced karma, initiations that hadn't been passed. And so the emphasis was to give all of us that opportunity to make things right again in terms of our own path. And so it was, even though the teachings were all there for personal Christhood and becoming a son or daughter of God. I mean, that was a big part of the teachings, but it couldn't be emphasized in the same kind of a way. And there were just a lot of people, from actual fallen ones to laggards to people in the organization, that were given a great opportunity to move ahead on the spiritual path, to actually be given the opportunity to be able to re-embody in the age of Aquarius. And so it was interesting kind of a scenario setup, and I believe that it fulfilled most of its raison d'etre, and clearly it could have done more, and I was very much involved with that, but it didn't. But it did a lot, and so it's if you look back, starting in 1875 was when the masters started their push for bringing forth the teachings for the Aquarian age, when they founded theosophy in the East and Christian Science in the West. And then throughout the 20th
mm.
century, different individuals and groups were sponsored, and there's been a tremendous change in the planetary consciousness. And so so the planet has made tremendous strides forward. People are much more advanced and together, and 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 yet, you can easily get lost in the nonsense of this world and what's going on, and think this world's in a really bad shape. but people have, have really much farther along. I mean, when I was very young, people would think that the Pope was the infallible word of God, or people's take on religion, or the Bible, all again the word of God, or Christianity is this great religion. I mean, uh, let alone the whole thing about individual rights and tolerance and all of the things that have happened. We're light years beyond all of that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Talk to the average person, and they're in many ways they're really ready for the spiritual path. I mean, they're just they got a lot of good things going in terms of no longer being prisoners or slaves to these power elites, and whether it's whatever ideology could be in religion and politics and economics. People are like they know something's wrong. They know that all of these things are really problematic. They just don't know where to turn. So
Mm,
hopefully more people will find something that will, lead them
yeah.
to a better
Well,
way. But
there's more and more signs and more ways for people to start, they're all discovering like it is about turning within and looking within the self. And I think there's enough out there, and there'll continue to be more. Like, look at how many of us, like, from all over the world have just, found these teachings. I just find that really kind of miraculous. And everyone has their own unique story of like just happening to sort of get this sense to look up something on the internet, and bang, we're on the Ask Real Jesus website. It was I
well, the
I love
internet
it.
is an incredible step forward. It can be also that going in a rabbit hole, but it's an amazing thing. Mind you, I was with Elizabeth Clare Prophet. We used to get like 5,000 people at a summer conference.
Mm,
Can
wow.
hardly be any people in comparison. I think we had like 60 people at the last conference. It's like, uh, uh, yeah, it's not quite the same. I mean, back then it was a movement. I don't know what you'd call what it is today, but it seems to be kind of like more of a quiet, behind the scenes development. I mean, Elizabeth Clare Prophet would appear on some of these big TV shows of the time. She went through court cases, and besides the bomb shelter routine and all these other things, it was big news back then. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So anyway, Ari, we've pretty much like filled up a whole bunch of time here. So I think we might just bring everything to a close now. And I'd just like to thank you for sharing and about all of this. It's helped me to sort of see a lot more about, yeah, just to get a very different perspective from, the movement between these two dispensations and what the experience was like. And my attitude has shifted for sure. So and also um, I appreciate the work that you guys did do back then with all of the decreeing, because, like I said, I really felt the shifts happening. It was magical or something, but yeah, now I understand. So, anyway, thank you for being here
praise
today.
God.
Yeah,
Pleasure.
yeah. All right. Okay, everybody. Thank you, and hope you've enjoyed today. See ya.